let's talk a little bit about New Orleans. Because in New Orleans, perhaps one of the most corrupt political establishments existed. In 1890, large numbers of Italians, mostly Sicilians, had gone to Louisiana. And the reason why they went to Louisiana was that there were groups in Louisiana, employers, businesses, who wanted cheap labor, right? Very similar to the circumstances that we see today. The cheap labor allowed them to undercut the Irish who had been here for a few years earlier, and also to undercut some of the blacks who were now free. So the Italians created a situation in New Orleans which made them the enemies of many, many people. And there was a police chief, David Hennessy, who was operating very much like the corrupt operations that we have here in New York. Prostitution, theft, gambling, you name it, it was all for sale. Well, some Italian businessmen were operating on the waterfront as stevedores. And when he ultimately was assassinated, all right, the final words that he supposedly said was that the Dagos had done it. And this is a kind of interesting story because he survived for 9 hours and no one questioned him. The fact of the matter is that Hennessy was one of the most corrupt individuals. He had killed 2 prior police commissioners, all right? He was on trial for murder and was acquitted. When the call came for someone to avenge the death of David Hennessy, the mayor of the city, Mayor Shakespeare, imagine that, called for a sense that this trial should be held under the utmost security. What they wanted was that any Italian, all right, could be arrested. Anybody who looked swarthy, anyone who looked like they may be a criminal. Clearly, one of the aspects of all of this was that 300 Italian Americans were arrested. Ultimately, what they did was they charged 19. And in one particular trial, they had 9 individuals who were up for trial, 6 were acquitted, and 3 were given a mistrial. Now, let's understand a couple of points here. No Italian was permitted on the jury. The judge, okay, was known to be a bigot. His name was Thompson. He decided that these men were guilty, all right? When these individuals were found not guilty, one would find this totally amazing, that based upon that political climate, that these individuals could be found not guilty. Well, the mayor of the city, Shakespeare, again calls for a rally. And what they do is they get 5,000 people. And those 5,000 people rush the prison, all right? And they decide that they're going to kill every one of them. Now, they were found not guilty. And the mayor of the city decided to arouse a crowd. The notion was that these were bandits. These were mafioso. Well, kind of interesting, isn't it? That most of these people were illiterate. Most of these people were dirt poor. And then they weren't even allowed a fair trial. But more interesting than Mayor Shakespeare and the reaction of Louisiana was how other people saw it. All right? Teddy Roosevelt, one of my heroes, said that these people got what they deserved. Henry Cabot Lodge, whose middle name, Cabot, comes from Cabota, from John Cabot. He's Italian. But it's been many, many years. All right? He says that they are an unseemly lot. The New York Times, right? The newspaper that says that they are unbiased with all the news that's fit to print, said that Italians have to abandon their criminal ways. Could you imagine people found not guilty, hung, and then have the major politicians and major newspapers of the day say that lynch law was the only way in which justice could be done. Of an individual, all right, who was corrupt, who was a murderer, who ends up living for 9 hours after he's shot, and only on the basis of a comment made that no one could validate. We have the New York Times, Teddy Roosevelt. I won't even get into Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson talked about Europe extricating its torrid elements. This great man who writes the history of the American people talks about Italians and Hungarians and Poles as being the worst sorts of people. When this event takes place, Benjamin Harrison is president, and Benjamin Harrison is horrified. And what he suggests is that something needs to be done. This is wrong. What ultimately happens is articles of impeachment are raised against him, and he abandons. The Italian government from the north, who supervised so much of the exploitation of Italians, they are horrified as well. And the 3 Italians who were Italian nationals, all right, are given a small compensation by the U.S. government. Amazing. Amazing.